spoilers for Silent Hill 2, obviously, but if you clicked on this video and don't want to be spoiled, then I think you're just in the wrong place. Also, Silent Hill goes over very real problems which I'll essentially be making light of, while I take Smiling Friends way too seriously, so do with that as you will. I've been a big horror guy practically my whole life, and Silent Hill 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, let alone horror games. And I'm not a huge comedy guy, if my monotone voice and dry sense of humor wasn't proof enough, but Smiling Friends has to be one of my favorite shows, easily top like, I don't know, 13. So why not mash these two completely unrelated franchises together? Not like they haven't thought about that themselves. James Sunderland is the protagonist we play as in-game and is put through the ringer both physically and mentally. Throughout the game, he almost never smiles and has a pretty severe case of depression and possibly PTSD. But lucky for him, it's Pim and Charlie's job to make people smile. So can the Smiling Friends help James Sunderland and essentially save his life, or will James end up in water? So let's set the stage. Silent Hill takes place in Silent Hill, Maine, making this the third video in a row where Maine is an important location. In Silent Hill 4, James's dad, Frank Sunderland, knew about James going to Silent Hill but never returned. So let's say that before the events of the second game, Frank calls the Smiling Friends to help his son. I don't know, that's really the best I got. Unless we're going off of the movie, then maybe his therapist called him. God, that movie was so bad, please don't go watch it. So the boss calls in Pim and Charlie to go help a young man smile after the death of his wife, and to meet him where the game picks up. It seems like Smiling Friends is set in Pennsylvania, so it's not a crazy long drive, not that they haven't traveled for a job before. And yes, each individual's experience in Silent Hill is different, but Pim and Charlie will also see what James sees for simplicity's sake. Going over Pim and Charlie here first. I won't be accounting for any of the others like Alan and Gleb since they usually only run duos on any given job. In a single year, they were able to make 126 people smile, which seems to be their new record given the way Mr. Boss talks about it. Obviously, we only see a select few of those, with most happening off screen. Some are extremely simple jobs, like a dude who thought he was blind but actually was just covering his eyes. But they've had serious cases, like in an episode where Desmond was literally about to blow his own head off, suicidal thoughts, having no meaning or purpose in the world, losing their girl, or the existential dread of knowing that you will one day die, are all topics they've gone up against before. Not to say that they're super duper world-class spiritual healers or anything though. Charlie can be really apathetic, like how he was ready to immediately give up in the very first episode, or when he was in a bad mood on Christmas Eve, or called out of work to stay home and play video games all day. But at the same time, he can be a realist, at least when it comes to other people, and giving them the solid advice that they need to hear. Like when he tried to get shrimp in the gym, or gives the evil wizard tips on how to stop his balding. Pim is usually much more positive, almost to a fault, but he's usually the one presenting the most ideas in any given job. Like showing Desmond the best parts life has to offer, convincing Doug to talk to his brother Dr. Psychotic after kicking him out, or doing a whole musical number to make Mr. Frog go talk to his dad. That all being said, a lot of their advice can be pretty generic or superficial, like don't give up on your dreams or let's go get a tan. There's also the fact that they occasionally only succeed due to sheer luck, like the Desmond or Mole Man episode, where for all intents and purposes, they fail to make them smile, but the episode's subplot wraps up with a main plot leading to a happy ending. It also goes without saying that this is certainly not a power scaling video, but the Smiling Friends have all been in extremely dangerous situations. Pim escaped from a forest demon, Charlie went through the 9 circles of hell to make the devil smile, and together they were abducted by aliens and went through the enchanted forest doing fantasy RPG type of quests. And the world that they live in is just super chaotic all the time, so basically being stuck in a foggy Elseworld full of dangerous monsters based on James's trauma is just another Tuesday for them. This is the part where I power scale James Sunderland's depression. James at the beginning of the game is unaware of what exactly happened to his wife, just that she died of her illness, but not that he's the one who actually killed her. He seems pretty down in the dumps throughout the entire game, but interestingly enough is never completely freaked out by the events of the game, confidently fighting monsters, falling into deep dark pits, and sticking his hands in gross toilets. James's experience forces him to face his past trauma, as well as atone for his wrongdoings in ways I'm not smart enough to analyze. Like, yes, clearly this creature represents the Mary on her deathbed and the verbal abuse James began to endure. No man, I looked that shit up. Every creature represents some part of James's psyche, like Pyramid Head and James's need for punishment after what he's done. And every place is either a special place to him and Mary, like the hotel, or reminds him of Mary, like the hospital, despite not being the actual hospital Mary stayed in while she was being treated. A lot of the specifics are up to interpretation, like when James killed Mary, or the exact meaning of each individual creature, but his need for atonement / suicidal feelings, as well as both his repressed hatred for Mary and the sadness he feels now that she's gone, are the driving forces of the whole game, at least from what I gathered. On top of all that, Angela, Eddie, and Laura are all real people in Silent Hill. Angela and Eddie are going through their their own personalized hells, while Laura sees the town normally without the monsters or anything. Maria is also there, but she's yet another physical manifestation of James's mind, and sees exactly what James sees. I feel like an important part of this whole thing will be whether or not Pim and Charlie could come to the conclusion that what they're seeing is connected to James's mental state, and if they can eventually piece it all together. There are three main possible endings here: In Water, Maria, and Leave. Alright, it's fanfic time. So let's say Pim and Charlie meet up with James right as he gets out of the bathroom, and let's brush past James's reaction to the pink and yellow man showing up just to help him smile. A big red flag they'd run into immediately is the whole reason James is there: a letter written by his late wife. Charlie would most likely assume James was crazy and tried to get out of the situation, but Pim never wants to outright give up on a client, on top of the fact that they did already drive 8.5 hours to get there. And this wouldn't be much of a video if I said they got there and then they left. The end. And then how would I get my sweet ad revenue? Quick, give them an ad. We run into Angela soon after this, and it's clear that there's something up with her from the jump. Silent Hill is foggy with a general eerie vibe to it, but by the time that the acid-spitting monsters start popping out, it'd be too late to leave. Again, whether or not Pim and Charlie could survive alongside James isn't really the point here, but considering that they've survived similarly dangerous situations, I think they'd make it out alive regardless of the ending James gets. They would likely be helpful in solving puzzles, especially the fetch quest types. Puzzles like the jukebox one being a special song between James and Mary would be important to figure out what's really going on. The group later seeing Angela freaking out with her knife and Eddie slowly losing his grip and becoming more violent would lead them to believe that Silent Hill itself manifests differently and creates a different experience for every individual there. On top of this, we see Laura, who's completely unaffected by the town, and Maria, who's attached to James and sees the same creatures as him. The two, especially Charlie, would most likely see right through Maria. She's really forward with James and her intentions with him, which given the situation is extremely inappropriate.
Oh, then. Lucky her.
What's that supposed to mean?
Nothing. Like I said, 3 years is a long time.
When they find out that Maria looks just like Mary by looking at the photo James keeps on him, they'd likely try to warn James that she's yet another manifestation of the town. But as we've seen throughout the show, they can sometimes chicken out when it comes to violence, and I don't think they do anything to Maria before her first death in the hospital. To get the In Water ending in Silent Hill, you have to inspect the knife you take from Angela, look at Mary's photos a few times, and keep your health low throughout the playthrough. These representing James's suicidal thoughts, his attachment to his dead wife and being unable to let her go and move on without her, / living with what he's done. Given it's their job to make James happy, I don't think Pim and Charlie would let him stop and stare at these things that obviously cause him mental anguish, and would most certainly tend to James with health drinks and syringes if he looks like he's about to drop dead. They help with Abstract Daddy and killing Eddie, reinforcing the earlier points. Maria showing up again in the labyrinth after dying right in front of them would confirm that she's not real, and would snap James out of any possible positive feelings that he may have for Maria. She does turn into a monster, as we see in the game's ending. I've kinda glossed over Laura so far, but I think Pim would be helpful when dealing with her and de-escalate situations where James gets frustrated with her when she isn't helpful and actively hinders the group. Charlie may immediately assume she's yet another monster similar to Maria, but I think Pim would advocate for her. Pim seems to want to have kids of his own, as we've seen a few episodes, and says he's good with kids.
This is gonna be great, Charlie. I love helping kids. I love kids, Charlie. I love kids!
And Pim being small and approachable and looking like a cartoon character, I think he'd get Laura to tell them more about her relationship with Mary sooner than we see in the events of the game itself. She'd tell him why she didn't like James and how mean he'd be to Mary, or how sad she'd see Mary after James would leave. Her story doesn't align with James's, who believed Mary to be dead for years, while Laura told him about the letter Mary gave to her only a week prior to the events of the game. At this point, Pim and Charlie would surely piece together the fact that James killed Mary. Pyramid Head would probably be a hard one to figure out by simply going through Silent Hill. He's an unstoppable force, but is there to ultimately help James come face to face with what he's done. James comes to the correct conclusion when facing the two Pyramid Heads. Now knowing what he's done, he more or less defeats them. I'll be honest, I don't think Pim and Charlie would figure out what the scarlet and rusty eggs represent, but I think they'd want to sit and listen to everything Mary has to say, which as far as I know, counts as points towards the In Water ending, but it's not the end all be all since I listened to it all on my first playthrough and got the Leave ending. After fighting the monstrous version of Maria, James remembers everything. It's likely that he killed Mary right before the events of the game with the intention of coming back to Silent Hill and committing suicide. Pim and Charlie always give alternatives when dealing with people, including those contemplating ending it all. Laura is an orphan who viewed Mary as a mother figure, and James being her husband, I think she could find comfort in knowing someone so close to Mary could look after her. I think the smiling friends could see to it that James gets the leave ending, saving his life and making him smile. I will say though that the UFO and dog endings are very much something we would see in Smiling Friends, but aren't quote unquote canon to Silent Hill. At least they're less canon than the main endings we're working with here. Smiling Friends win. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.